Today is Thursday, October 10th, 2024, and this is episode 282 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kalat.
Good evening, Jerry. How are you, sir?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. Every time you go to your undisclosed southern command, it seems to summon a hurricane, though.
Well, what can I say? What can I say? I do live in, I will say that I do live in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. So
the weather control is in flight.
Maybe there's
but
something
anyway,
there.
I am well. And, I can't believe this is show 282. That is crazy to me.
Yeah, like I said, we have about 718 before we, I think, get pretty good at this.
It's true. Well, I think we figured out some of our technical glitches, so hopefully this one will also be out in video, and maybe some new stuff out in video soon. We're getting more sophisticated. Since you quit your job and you're an unemployed bum, we got time.
It's a funny thing. I don't know how I had time to work before. I feel like I am so busy. But anyway, just a reminder before we get started, the thoughts and opinions that we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers, which even could include prospective employers, although they could for the right price.
It's true, which is getting lower by the minute for you as an unemployed bum, I imagine.
Yeah, that number is dropping. I think I'm at about minimum wage right now.
A couple of free McDonald's meals and you're good to go.
That's right. I need a Happy Meal. All right. The first story today comes from the Microsoft Security blog, and this is titled "File Hosting Services Misused for Identity Phishing." It's I would say kind of an interesting take on an old tactic. And the way this works, and I guess this is something that Microsoft has detected happening somewhat frequently recently, which is the reason they wrote about it in the post. But basically what's happening here is attackers are leveraging third-party vendors of an organization that they're trying to target. And they, through whatever means, are able to compromise a business ID of a supplier, and then they leverage that supplier's file storage, whether that's OneDrive or Dropbox or any of the many other such services, to then upload a bit of malware. And the reason they do this is that there's a pre-existing relationship. So we know, we know very well the implications of trust on these types of attacks. And so this is really leveraging, that trust in a new way. So you're not necessarily surprised to receive an email or receive a file from a supplier. You may, even if you're not necessarily expecting it. And they point out that it's quite often the case that suppliers are allow listed, or at least in some way accommodated for, so that they don't end up in spam or caught in some sort of a security piece of software. Now, from there, the attack goes a little bit different direction, because a lot of organizations, as they point out, have gotten more sophisticated in their defenses. And so the way that these attacks are being propagated or prosecuted, I should say, is one of two ways. Number one is they restrict the access to the file to the specific victim they're trying to target, or they set the file to only be viewable, so basically not downloadable. And the implication there is that that file can then not be analyzed by normal security software. So like your proof points and whatnot can't actually get a copy of that and then try to detonate it because it doesn't have access to do that. Now, once that email gets into its ultimate destination, the end victim is, of course, asked to authenticate to the resource Dropbox or OneDrive, which happens normally, right? That's a normal thing. But then once they do that, they get what appears to be a preview. The actual document that was uploaded by the adversary is what appears to be a preview with a link to another site. So it looks like you as the recipient have to take a further step to authenticate and get access to the document. When you do that, that's when the magic happens, because then it diverts you to another site that prompts you again for your authentication. And it's at that point that it's stealing your login ID and your two-factor credential, and then you basically it's game over. At that point, the adversary now has your everything they need to impersonate the end victim and get access to whatever they want. So quite an interesting attack.
Yeah, it's clever, multi-step, and it's like I mentioned, it's leveraging that trust of that, Dropbox or, whatever it is for the initial prompt as something that, every day I use this every day. There's nothing weird about that link, and it just kind of lulls the user into this is normal everyday behavior. There's nothing wrong with this. There's no reason for them to be suspicious. I do think, though, that next link hop may be a good spot where like endpoint reputation scanning could potentially pick it up. Like if it's going to a URL that's 3 days old or something like that, that might be a chance to catch it. If you've got some sort of sophisticated EDR or secure web gateway of some variety that's looking at where your web traffic is going, you might have a chance to stop it there. But it's clever.
Yeah, they point out that the file, at least in their experience, the files are named in one of three different ways. One is related to existing business that's happening between the supplier and the victim. So, if they use the example of an audit report. So if there's an audit going on between the two organizations, they might name the file audit report. Something that is familiar based on context, and so they use the example of troubleshooting guidelines. And then the third one is something, as we've talked about in the past, as everybody who's ever taking security awareness training knows, is topics based on urgency. I thought it was very interesting. One of the examples they use, which I assume is something that they actually saw, was a document called compromised password reset, which I think is a very interesting lure to get people to take action based on the purporting that you have you have to take action as a result of a security problem.
Well, there's absolutely a sense of urgency around that, right? That is what we've trained our people to do. So once again, using psychology against us.
Absolutely. And then Microsoft goes on, of course, to advertise how they, how their products can be configured to help mitigate this, using things like conditional access policies. But I think you hit the nail on the head that your opportunity to defend against this is really that clicking the link to the actual phishing page. If you have to have something in place that will be able to detect that. and it's not going to be detectable in that initial email. It's going to have to be something. It's at that point, it's like any other kind of watering hole attack. Like, you've got to have something on the endpoint that's able to detect that sort of malicious activity.
And the tough part is those endpoints might be mobile devices, which don't usually have as robust controls as like a thick client, like a Mac or Windows machine. So that could be an interesting problem. I mean, the other potential aspect to pick this up, although it might be a little bit late, is when that compromised credential is used from a very new, different IP, like geographically impossible travel is one other possible way you could pick it up. Like, normally this person logs in from Atlanta and suddenly now they're in Nairobi. Okay, that's a problem. And I mean, yeah, that could happen if they spun up a VPN or they're bouncing out of Africa, but otherwise it could be the bad actor coming in from that IP. And perhaps if you're tuning and looking for that sort of thing, you might be able to pick it up. But again, that's not easy.
And they do point out that the Microsoft passwordless sign-in with FIDO2 does also mitigate it. So that may be another opportunity as well. I think the challenge there, though, is it's kind of dependent upon the way in which your supplier is trying to share documents with you.
Sure.
So
yeah,
it may not. If you have some sort of a mutual authentication set up in place with your third party, that might work. But I think in other instances, you may still have some problems.
Yeah, I mean, how often are you doing, especially for a short-term engagement, some sort of mutual SSO environment or whatnot? I imagine most of those times are probably going to be, single factor plus SMS. I would guess is probably the most of the situation at best for these third-party suppliers with short-term engagements.
Right.
Yeah, that makes it tough.
So interesting, quite interesting report there. The next story comes from the Tenable blog, and this is part of a multi-part blog, but there's one specific section in there that I thought was very interesting, and this particular topic was AI oversharing is out of control. And this is a piece of a report from an organization whose name escapes me, the National Cybersecurity Alliance. I should have remembered that. What they've identified or they've reported in this report is that about right around, I guess, depending on the age group that you're talking about, between 50% and 15% are sharing company confidential information with third-party AI systems. And it opened up a lot of questions for me. And so to some extent, you could say, well, the Gen Z population is reporting that at a much higher rate they're sharing confidential information with these AI sites, whereas baby boomers are doing it very, very infrequently. I do have to wonder if, is that actually because the sharing isn't happening, or is it because they don't realize that they're actually doing it? And I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but is the definition of what constitutes an AI system, not consistently understood between generations? Maybe.
I think there's also just a comfort level of new technology is more comfortable with younger folks. It's always been the case.
Well, it's fair. That's also true.
It just sucks because we're Gen X and we're like 2 generations away now from the youngins. So,
and nobody cares about us.
We are no longer relevant. We are not the target demographic.
Well, they never cared about us.
That's also true.
So, but I look, this was something that I was very concerned about. I think a lot of companies need to be concerned about from a couple of different dimensions. Obviously, when you upload content into an AI system like that, typically you're granting access, you're granting rights for that organization to learn based on you learn from your content. And so if it's source code, that could become part of the corpus of source code that they're now using to help their other customers create source code. If it's financial information, same thing. So, or personal information, right? So, realistically, you need to have in place the right kinds of agreements with, whatever type of service you're going to use, and limit your employees to only those particular sites. But I think the challenge that this report is trying to highlight is that's kind of like trying to stop a rising tide.
Yeah, everything's getting AI built into it. I don't think most people, even if you care a great deal about this, are able to keep up with what AI is appearing in everywhere and how it's set up and what agreements are in the EULAs and what you're agreeing to. I mean, you could have a great, like you mentioned, you could have a great governance policy, but this is like shadow IT on steroids. Unless you have things really locked down and really controlled, it's going to be very difficult to prevent your employees from not going and utilizing some unsanctioned AI system. But there's a flip side of that too, which is there's a competitive issue here. If your company is super paranoid and you're not going to let your employees go to any AI, and all of your competitors are, how is that impacting your productivity? And that's a very real concern. I know we only focus on it from the risk side, but that's not the end of the conversation. There are folks very much in the C-suite who care about productivity and efficiency and capability. And if all their competitors, for good or ill, are jumping on that AI bandwagon and you're not, very good chance you're going to be left behind in the market. And
absolutely,
then your company
but
doesn't
I think
exist.
it has to be done. It has to be done with your eyes open, though. I think that's the issue. I think one of the issues I observed, right, is that, again, people don't necessarily think about where all this is happening. So a great example that I always used to point out was Grammarly. And I don't mean to pick on them. I think it's actually a pretty useful service. But, Grammarly actually is taking the things that you're typing, and it's, transiting that information into their servers. And so, if you're processing personal information, and you don't have the right kinds of agreements in place, even if Grammarly's a great company, super secure, you don't have the right legal framework in place to actually be doing that in the first place. So,
right.
I think that's the challenge that I think we have. It's not all about like data breaches, as we've talked about recently in the past. It's also there's an emergence of new ways of being penalized for letting data go into the wrong places. And I think this is an opportunity that's going to continue to be a problem. But like you said, like this is and I know it's heretical to say, right? But this is the way businesses are moving, right? They are moving at breakneck speed towards embracing AI. But I think the challenge is like it has to be done in a somewhat organized way and not based on just letting employees go figure out which things they want to use.
No, I think it's fair. I think there's another danger here, which is not a net new tool that has AI, but an existing tool that has AI added to it that you're not aware of. This isn't, I'm making up an example here. This is not true. But let's say Excel suddenly has a large LLM built into it. And so all of your data that you're putting in all your spreadsheets are now going to Excel, AI. And they're not limiting it to your tenant. And now, so Excel, in this case, although it's fictional, is a sanctioned tool, but it adds an AI component that is broad in its sharing of its learning. And before you know it, without any, intent, you're suddenly sharing confidential information to this third party. And I mean, Excel's a bad example. I mean, I could pick on probably what's more realistic is something like an EDR. In my world, I see a lot of these EDR providers like rushing headlong into AI, and their search bar is now an AI bar, and this sort of stuff where little bits of AI are appearing in all these existing tools, and you probably didn't negotiate or think about any of that when you bought that tool, and now suddenly you don't know what you're leaking.
Right.
So, I mean, again, I'm not picking on any one particular tool. It's more the concept in general that concerns me. But, it also feels a bit like when clouds first started showing up and AWS was all the rage. And, there are organizations and leaders who were, visionary, who were moving to the cloud. And some of us in security were like, whoa, we don't understand all the security implications. Careful. And those security people got left behind. And business went around those security people. And that could be a career-limiting event. So I'm not saying you have to find the balance between empowering and educating the business. And if you're too much of a naysayer, you will lose credibility and influence with your C-suite. Is kind of the difficult balance on topics like this.
Yeah, I think that as security leaders, I think the situation we find ourselves in is having to try to facilitate the business's smart adoption of this technology. I mean, we can say it's good or it's bad or what have you, but the reality is it's happening. Yeah. It is just happening, and so it's either us or our replacements that are going to help with the sane adoption of it.
Yep. I would agree.
All right. The next story we have comes from the Register, and I always love their little sarcasm sprinkled throughout their articles. I appreciate it. So the title of this story is "American Water Rinsed in Cyber Attack Turns Off App. It's Still Safe to Drink, Top Provider Tells Us." So American Water is a public company. I didn't actually realize there were any publicly traded water companies, but this was a learning experience for me. So American Water is a U.S., as their name might imply, a provider of water. They have about 14 million customers, and I think they're somewhat geographically limited, but very recently, I think sometime last week, they disclosed that they were the subject of an attack, and as a result of that, they had to disable their billing. They have a mobile app they call My Water, which is also for billing, and that app is disabled. And they've gone on to say that it has not impacted at all their OT, so that their actual ability to produce and provide water hasn't been impacted. But one might ask, well, how long could that go if you're not collecting any money? I don't know the answer to that, but obviously not forever. But it's this, by the way, feels very much like something that happened a long time ago with Colonial Pipeline. There was at the time,
long time ago. You mean like 3 years ago?
Feels like it was like 10 years ago.
I'm going to go look anyway, because it wasn't that long ago. Yeah.
Whenever that was.
Yeah, 2021, sir.
Jeez. My sense of time is very distorted right now. Anyway,
that's fair.
Similar situation there. They were also subject of a significant attack, that I believe impacted their IT systems. But because they're a pipeline provider and because this company is a water company, it's hard to distinguish or at least delineate between the IT part, an IT type attack, from an OT attack. So again, no indication of an OT impact here.
Right.
Looks like kind of traditional, probably ransomware. No indication exactly how it happened. One could assume it's almost certainly the same way all these are happening, like, vulnerable firewall, something like that. So we don't know. That would be kind of wild ass speculation on our part. But I think it's interesting that when a company like a water provider is impacted is like big news. Whereas this is happening over and over. Like it happens so often, it's almost not newsworthy anymore until it happens to a company like this.
Right. No, I agree. And it's somewhat helpful that their OT stuff isn't impacted, because that's where it could get really dangerous, right? I mean, we've seen another case, I think it was in Texas, where somebody fiddled with some of their SCADA and overfilled a certain chemical that could have been harmful if that water had gone out to customers, but it was caught. So clearly, I think here that their billing and back office systems were separated in some way, and hopefully that's a fairly strong segregation and a fairly decent firewall logically between them. But these sorts of things start with potentially a foothold on the consumer billing side and could spread very easily. And I fear we are getting closer and closer to some sort of water system or electrical system hack that does some real harm, to people, the way things are going.
Good point. You pointed out the importance of that. I'll use it in the non-technical sense, the firewall between IT and OT. And I don't mean that in the normal sense. Like you have to have the right kind of segregation, because I think IT tends to be a lot more transactional, have a larger attack surface, maybe.
Right. And I think on the OT side, I don't think it's nearly as well protected. I don't think it's nearly as well patched. I don't think it's nearly as hardened. In general what we've learned. And the more automation we do, the more susceptible it could be to attacking. So we talked about this on a previous show recently about how the OT side of the house could learn a lot from the IT side in the way we do things. And I think vice versa, right? There's the amount of required uptime and stability and reliability necessary on the OT side is something IT is not super well known for.
Yes.
So.
Yes, indeed.
Well, this is why I was going to say, this is why I hand harvest my water from cruelty-free sources. Open range water.
You have a big hole in your backyard?
Yeah, and I put a tarp out and I just collect it from the air.
You're a water farmer, moisture farmer. Is that what?
I wish
Uncle
I were that
Ben
cool.
was?
Yeah, it's true. No, I'm on municipal water like everybody else because I'm lame. But in all seriousness, though, like these hurricanes lately have reminded me, and it's something. It's not being paranoid. I recommend everybody have stored water of at least a gallon per person per day. For at least a month. On site and rotated every 6 months. I know I'm getting into like crazy prepper land here, but it's not that hard. There's really good, containers that stack that are easy to fill and refill and, get water out of that are healthy to store water long periods of time. And we see over and over again these boil water advisories and these outages, and water is super important, especially if pets. We've got 3 cats, 2 of them which are elderly, and it's not a bad thing to have just a backup plan. And it's very low cost, and it gives a lot of peace of mind. So just my unsolicited 2 cents on the waterfront.
That's a good point. I know that a lot of people up in the mountains in North Carolina didn't think they were vulnerable to such natural disasters, but
yeah.
But here we are. And actually just today read about how there was a a person who was known as kind of a wild prepper up there, who now is like helping out like dozens of different families who, who don't have access to water. The roads are impassable and they don't have water and food and power. So I think it's certainly good advice.
It's just, it's not being super paranoid. It's just we're very reliant on these systems and they can break.
Yes, indeed.
Or be taken down.
All right. Our last story for today also comes from the Register. This one scares me a lot, and I don't know why, but it does. Not necessarily because of the specific details, but just the concept here. So the title of the story is "Some U.S. Kaspersky customers find their security software replaced by Ultra AV." For those of you who don't know, there's been a long-standing tiff between the U.S. government and the Russian government, largely because of what's going on in Ukraine.
Tiff, you make it sound like there's a little slap fight going on between the governments.
Well, there's lots of sanctions that the U.S. government has imposed on Russia, and the U.S. government in particular. I guess it was about a year and a half ago or so had determined that Kaspersky was no longer eligible to be sold in the U.S. And so Kaspersky's been...
And that's because they're based in Russia, right?
Because they are based in Russia, yes.
Yeah.
Eugene Kaspersky was very famously I think a KGB or FSB or whatever their intelligence agency is agent, and so there was some concern that perhaps U.S. government or U.S. Entities using Kaspersky antivirus would expose them to attacks from Russia, and there's a lot of back and forth. Kaspersky offered to allow the U.S. government to inspect its source code, and the U.S. government ignored that. And personally, I think it was as much a financial sanction as it was anything else. But I mean, I'm not an international relationship expert, but
you're barely a domestic relationship expert.
I'm barely domestic. That's very true.
Sorry, go on. Sorry.
So Kaspersky then worked out a deal with this company called Ultra AV to replace its agent running on systems. By the way, it's not entirely clear to me which scope of systems this were impacted at. I know it was systems that were for pay. I think it may actually be limited to consumer systems. I don't know that it was corporate. That part is not clear to me. But in any event, I think it was over the past 3 weeks or so, Kaspersky was systematically replacing their agent with the Ultra AV agent, kind of whether you wanted to or not. I think you did have the ability to opt out, but it took you had to actually take some overt action, and I think that was for Mac and Windows systems, if I recall.
Yeah, it's wild to just have a complete different AV software dropped, which. Let's say you're a business and you happen to be using Kaspersky. You never vetted Ultra AV, which, by the way, sounds like an anime name. You never. It's very weird to me that they would yank. I mean, I get the background, but to yank one complete piece of software and replace it with, in essence, a competitor. I mean, how is? Think of all the legal implications, the EULA, the terms and conditions, again, we don't know everybody's impacted, but if you're a business, no, you signed a contract with Kaspersky, not Ultra AV, and you don't know who they are. You haven't vetted them. You don't know, are they even legitimate? Are they even trustworthy? What's their third-party risk management look like? This is very crazy to me.
Are they even compatible with your systems? I mean,
right. Yeah.
Could Could it cause some incompatibility that causes your system to just blue screen?
That's a great point. Like you probably did a test rollout of Kaspersky with your test gear and all that sort of stuff before you did a wide roll to the fleet, and this is like YOLO.
So again, I don't know. Again, I've not heard of any corporate impacts. I think this was probably largely limited to home users of Kaspersky software. But I found that the concept of a government agency, by the way, we just saw within the past couple of days, the .io domain is now apparently potentially going to be sunset because the country, I didn't realize it, by the way. I have several .io domains that I own. And that was a country code, right? And the country of that country code is no longer a thing. And so
I don't think you own them then. I think you're renting them, and that rent's about it.
Yes.
Yeah, that is wild.
So,
like there are big companies who've built their brand on a .io domain.
Like GitHub.io and DockerHub.io.
Right.
I mean, there's huge implications. And so it's kind of an interesting side tangent, but the whims of governments and its ability to impact IT decisions in ways that are like well outside of your control are concerning. Like let's say what if you were in Europe or Russia? I mean, let's turn the tables, right? You're in Russia, and I know it's a silly example, right? But suddenly you're not allowed to use CrowdStrike anymore, probably.
Right.
Now, I don't know if CrowdStrike would try to replace your agent with Kaspersky. I don't know, but it's a concerning thing conceptually that that these kinds of deals could happen, that government whims could impact what we're allowed to use after we've gone through a very thorough vetting process. It's also concerning the facts of this particular case because Ultra AV, when you read this particular article, you'll realize that like they're unheard of. Like nobody knows who they are. They don't participate in normal like antivirus industry vetting and whatnot. They're apparently going to do that prospectively sometime later this year, allegedly. But again, like this is it's a concept that's concerning to me. You brought up the agreement part, which is a great point. Like, so you've signed contract terms with Kaspersky, or you name your vendor, and suddenly your vendor, for whatever reason, is backing out. Maybe they have to, and substituting someone in whose contract is in force at that point. And what happens, like if they're hosted in a different country, they don't have the same data protection terms. Like that, it makes my head hurt.
Think if this was a malicious actor doing a supply chain attack.
Right.
Right. If you've got the power to do this, and completely swap this out with a completely other agent, like hands off with no. Yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking all sorts of like. This whole thing feels sketchy to me. Like I don't like any of this, and I don't have anything against Kaspersky, by the way. I actually don't. I never saw any credible evidence that there was anything sketchy about Kaspersky itself. No. But who knows? But I mean, but to be fair, I do see that about Chinese companies that we don't trust. We know we've got plenty of evidence of the Chinese government stealing intellectual property through their businesses abroad. Like we know that. We see that all the time. I can't say that we ever saw that with Kaspersky or have any evidence of that, but still this feels very sketchy and not. I would be very uncomfortable if this were happening in my place of work.
Yes, or on my personal PC.
Yeah, well, I don't run AV on my personal PC because my information just wants to be free. It just wants none of those restrictions, man. I have a hit.
Like backups, antivirus is only for people who plan to fail, right?
Right. It's fine. It's fine. Anyway, yeah, that's a crazy story. I would love to learn more. I'm sure some more things will come out, and inevitably, I bet we're going to find out Ultra AV is like not great and has problems and is causing outages. And
well, they do interview some people who don't go on record with their name, but they have some fairly. They're not very high on it. I guess is the way I characterize it. So I don't want to disparage it because I don't have any. I've never heard of it before. This story. So I mean, it may be perfectly fine product, but it sounds like it may have some room for improvement. I guess I'll say it that way.
Much like our show.
Yes. Well, but people. I mean, the people here know that. Like they're here
the bar is set low.
They're here in spite of those problems.
That's true. God love them.
So, in any event, thank you again for your attention. Hopefully this was useful to you. You can find all of our episodes now on YouTube, as well as our website, www.defensivesecurity.org. And you can find it on just about every podcast platform that you can think of. And one final point, if you do like it, and even if you don't like it, please give us a 5-star review, because that would make you awesome, or more.
If you can do
6 stars,
go for
6 stars would be fine. Yeah.
No, we appreciate it. You know, this has been a long time labor of love for Jerry and I, and it really matters to us that people care and that they get something out of it. So it's helpful.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it. And, how else are we going to buy our next orchid if we don't get that love?
That's right. They're all back there. All right. Especially for me, who's now an unemployed bum. Yes. All right. You can. So just before we leave, you can follow Mr. Kalat on social media. Where?
At both X/Twitter, I still can't call it X, and InfoSec.exchange on the Fediverse, which is Jerry's wonderful Mastodon instance with the same handle, @Lerg, Lerg.
And you can find me on Mastodon or the Fediverse at Jerry at infosec.exchange. And with that, we will talk again real soon. Thank you all.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.